Space Talks with Z is hosted by America's Future Series great friend and advisor, Zaheer Ali. Space Talks with Z provides a forum for thought leaders to share insights and recommendations on how America and its allies can stay at the forefront of exploration, commercialization, and defensive space. Please visit our website to register to see all of Z's content and our many other programs for free at www.americas-fs.org. We especially hope you will join Jeff Bezos, Dr. Henry Kissinger, National Cyber Director Chris Inglis, Orson Scott Card, General Keith Alexander, and many other interesting leaders during our virtual Cyber, Land, Air, Sea and Space Summit on November 1st and 2nd.
Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon. On this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of Space Talks with Z. We are here at Kennedy Space Center in Florida at the Cape, where all of the early days of American spaceflight happened. Behind us, we've got the Saturn V, the rocket that took us to the moon. And in front of it here, in blue, is a ULA model, which represents modern commercial spaceflights. And I'm here with Jayden Sage, who you recognize from our chat during the Space Innovation Summit. And, you know, we're filming this here today with the past literally behind us. That is the past of space, human endeavors in space, primarily funded by the government, built for government purposes. But that's not the future. And here, you know, talking with Jayden, that's really what we want to talk about is the future and where we're going and what we need to do, particularly economically, to make sure that we become a multi-planetary species or evolve into whatever we need to be to live out in space. Jayden, welcome. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.
Jayden, you have a Coke can in your hand, and I know that's for a purpose. Tell us about it.
Yes, so humanity has been lost a little bit in how processes come together. So when the nation, 1776, was inspired and then created, it was a dream. The United States is still a dream we never want to wake up from. But when we laid out this dream, we built out an infrastructure. And an infrastructure that's well built out, well thought out, and collectively and in a united manner, we brought it together. We were able to give birth to products such as these. Now look at this product. It's basically water, sugar, syrup. And in its own way, it conquered the whole world.
That's right.
And all it required was one or two people in a drugstore somewhere who didn't even invent things. They just basically concocted a formula from other older formulas and gave us a product that, in a way, conquered the world. So in the same way, for the space industry, you're going to have unforeseen positive benefits from the government setting up the infrastructure and seeing space much like that completely ongoing dream.
But dreams also take effort. There are specific actions that had to be taken to fulfill the promise, to fulfill the dream of America. Not just the infrastructure, but it was continually defended, and there was expansion. What is the railroad of space? What are the steps that we need to take so that we can get our space shuttle?
Right. In order to hold sand in your hand, you have to actually let go. As much as you want to just constrict your hand in order to hold the sand, you must learn the fine art of letting go. And that's what the industry needs to do. The government portion of it needs to do is to let go a little bit and foster, create the platform for the fostering of innovation for the industry to come in and do what it does best. Government needs to do what government does best, and that will allow industry to do what it does best. So while the government lays out the tracks, then people can say, I see that there's a train here and I can make some money by selling some goods on that train or transporting my goods. So the railway has to be built by the government. But if the government doesn't create a platform for others to come in, and it's more an exclusive club that facilitates only government type projects, then you're not letting go enough, and you're not allowing the unknown open space, which is where industry would fit itself. If you're going to predetermine what's going to happen there and micromanage a little bit, then you won't allow industry to do what it does best. What government needs to do is get to the point of allowing this space to be treated less like a defense industry and far more like the next step in an economic zone or an economic boom.
So it's interesting. It sounds a lot like part of what you're saying is we need to treat the burgeoning space economy perhaps in ways the way the internet was treated, rather than the way aviation was treated. Now there's an instinct, I think, in not only government but also industry to perhaps falsely equate these things, right? Aerospace, right? That's how we've talked about it for so many years, aerospace. But I guess we need to drop the aero side of the thinking and treat space as its own thing, perhaps. And when you think about how government needs to react, government was heavily involved in aero, right? And they really, as you said, laid out everything and kind of defined what could be done. But with the internet, they pretty much left us all alone.
By design or by default?
Well, yeah, by design or by default. I mean, at some level, I think a lot of the bureaucrats just didn't understand what the heck was happening. Right. And so that's a reality too. But what do you think in that? What is the right way to think about this, to mold it? What recommendations would you give?
So NASA has had a trajectory. It was born during the Cold War. There was a strong element of defense involved in the process. Now, if you're going to open up an economy that's based in space, NASA, in my view, needs a new definition. And that NASA needs to stand for something else. And what that would be is New American Space Adventure.
I love it. New American Space Adventure.
So that would allow us to at least view NASA's role as a growing role, as the fostering of an economic environment for space. The heavy lifting cannot be done by industry. That's not the industry's job. When Coca-Cola cans needed to be processed and sent out to different parts of the country, it was the railroads, it was the infrastructure built by the government. The roads were built by the government. Coca-Cola didn't come along and say, well, now we need to build roads too in order to move our product. All of that had to be laid down, and then the government also, win-win, government benefited by jobs, by tax revenue and everything else. So there is a win, but you just have to allow it to grow on its own, and a new redefined definition, even if it's just mental, is something we need in order to grow into the next phase of humanity moving into space.
So another part of this, and this is something that my colleague at Thunderbird, Greg Autry, has written and spoken a lot about, is the need to make sure that we don't accidentally crush the industry. Right now, for example, people are talking about the FAA defining regulations for space. Now, the FAA wants to live in a world where the likelihood of failure and the risk tolerances are at the 1,000th of a percent level. Extremely low. Now, air travel is extremely safe because of that. But at the same time, it's very concerning how you build an industry with that level of requirement.
You can't. Those requirements are a perception management engineered tool. In order to create an environment where the funding doesn't dry up and you have the consensus of the government body, in order for the public opinion to align, in order for there to be funding to continue to stream. Industry operates out of iterative improvements, and failure is part of the process. I'm sure they didn't, make 1 million cans of the first version of this puppy.
Right.
So you can't have failure is not an option. When you learn to walk, the first thing you do is fall. Then you get up and you fall again. That's not the point where the parents say, okay, that's enough of this walking crap. Kid, you don't need to walk. Yeah. That would be a terrible world.
You have to accept it.
It's just acceptance, but that's part of NASA being born in a different environment And now it's going to have that pivot of its perception of who itself is. Basically, it's a little bit of a soul searching. Who are we for the future?
I mean, it's really interesting because at some level, that's a fundamental change to the agency and to the administration as well. Right now, the charter talks about things like defending the home planet, but maybe that's not NASA's job anymore. Maybe it needs to be more like the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, which does research and then hands it over to the industry and says, go make money and jobs and stuff with this. But it's a complete head shift.
But it's ill-defined. It's like, okay, so you're defending the home planet from who and what? Your fellow humans who you don't necessarily always agree with. So how does that matter?
Right. That's a defense role.
Right.
That's not a civil agent administration's role.
Right.
But then, if we change this fundamentally, and NASA rethinks itself, what role does industry then play, and how does it interface and take that forward?
Just create the platform and industry will find its way. Industry actually operates on economic principles.
Right.
Supply and demand. The invisible hand of the market will dictate not just pricing, but entry points of where there is opportunity. We are living in a cluster of everything already been invented, kind of, and like everybody's like, okay, what am I going to do? Make this can better or make it cherry Coke in order to find a niche market? I want blue oceans of new markets, right? So that new market mentality will project the companies that are already in space or new startups to go out there and build products we can't even conceive of. That's the most important thing. The most exciting part is not what we can project out as the future industries of space. It's the ones we can't think of. Those are the ones
that'll surprise us.
Exactly. Those are the ones that are going to give. Like when Christopher Columbus was running around looking for funding, he couldn't have said, well, once we get over there, there'll be a nation born, and then they'll make this amazing drink and you'll want it. And guess what? You may want some chocolate too. Cocoa.
Yeah. They didn't know what they were going to get.
Right. So you have to have a little bit of faith. It's like taking a leap of faith that if we build out the infrastructure, if you build it, they will come. They will come.
So I mean, it sounds like it's time to party like it's 1999 when we were on the cusp of the internet really breaking open and changing the world. And we have had so many amazing things, some crazy things too, of course, happen. But fundamentally, it created more industries than we even now know what to do with. And it continues to do that, right? Crypto is fundamentally based on concepts and ideas that came from the internet. Crypto doesn't work without the communication capabilities of the internet, and that came out of nowhere.
So here's the conundrum. The challenge is this, that the growth of the internet industry, even the growth of crypto, but let's just keep using the internet example.
Sure.
The way these two industries, space and the internet, are differentiated is in the internet, a lot of the legislative people didn't understand it. They were like, okay, what's this internet? Can you give me a printout of that?
Right, the old joke.
I've heard that.
Don't print the internet.
Yeah, I've heard that, and it was like, what?
Is there an insurance ad about that? Right?
So basically, it's a different paradigm. But in space, you can't have that. We need the elderly in the space industry to guide us to that future of tomorrow. We can't do this without them. So we actually have to kumbaya. We can't have some 17-year-old out there coming up with a new application and then rocketing to the moon with it technically. But that's not how it's going to work. We're going to need everybody, including all the different generations, to come together in order to make this happen. So there's a fundamental difference between the internet and that they were kind of out of the way. They couldn't legislate it to death because they just didn't understand it. But in the space industry, they do understand it, but they only understand it from a defense perspective. To a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right. So this is going to be an exercise in leaders like yourself and others that we've had on Space Talks, influencing the government, influencing the right people to, it sounds fundamentally like, stay the heck out of the way, and make sure this has to be safe for the general public, but within the industry, we're going to have to take some risk, and we're going to have to realize that to go, we have to do things that have never been done before.
What is the difference between a parent and a grandparent? A parent is basically micromanaging the crap out of your life, right? Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. What is the role of a grandparent? To come
They're
in.
the fun ones.
They're the fun ones because they come in and give you these bigger rails to go through. They give you that wisdom while your freaked out parents are just, doing all sorts of stupid things because they have other stress points in their life because they have to do the day-to-day. They got to feed you, provide for you, all that stuff. But the grandparents have seen it all, done it all, and they're providing you with the wisdom necessary in order for your growth. So the old space industry has to go into that grandparent role. And we need them. Any child that grows up with parents and grandparents is a far better human to deal with than somebody who just grew up with their parents. Not that that can be bad, but what I'm saying is somebody who has generational wisdom that they have within them allows them to foster their growth and help increase a win-win for all of us. So if we had that, we as a nation have that. Think of other nations. Do they have that?
They don't.
They don't have that.
They're starting from scratch.
Some of these nations, they can't even say, well, Grandpa, you worked in the space industry. You tell me. No, Grandpa didn't work in the space industry. In fact, Grandpa didn't work in any industry. So basically, we are blessed to have the wisdom of our elders in the space industry who pulled a rabbit out of their head. Go over here and look at the technology that was used in order to take us to the moon. It's insane. And what they pulled off, we haven't pulled off on the internet. We haven't done anything like what the greatest generation did. We haven't. Basically, we're doing iterative improvements of BS in order to facilitate the growth and basically bring in the almighty dollar. But when you go to places like this and you actually look at what they accomplished, took us to the moon, then you deeply understand how much their wisdom is what we need in order for us to grow. But they have to go from that parental role to that grandparent role in order to provide us the wisdom for our growth collectively.
And therefore, in that way of thinking, the role of even the government really in some ways needs to be that grandparent wider rails role, and let industry define what ends up happening, where the narrower rails are, in some ways by the market, but perhaps in some ways by sheer audacity as well, right? Relativity wants to be the first company to put anything, first commercial company to put anything on Mars, and they think they can do it in just 2 or 3 years. Then it's not clear where their market is for that, but the audacity to go do that as a commercial entity has a place, does it not?
Yeah, but look, the government, everybody wants to hate the government. Everybody wants to hate the boss, right? Like you have a love-hate relationship with the boss. The government is the boss and then we want to hate them, but we also got to recognize we put them in their place. We created the government in order to facilitate growth and protection and everything else that we enjoy. So we need the government as a partner in this, but we need to build a better relationship on how that works. We can't just say they need to move the heck out of the way, because I would like to live in a world where I can actually call the people with that wisdom and say, hey, what do you think we should be doing? Because you've been around the block 20 times. You know, the young man knows the rules. The old man knows the exceptions to those rules.
Right.
And I would not want to live in a world where we don't have access to that. And in America, we're blessed to have that access. And if we're going to choose to say, stay the heck out of our way, we're only going to trip up. A young kid who doesn't want to listen to their parents or grandparents, he's going to trip up. Makes a lot of mistakes. So let's not do that in Space 2.0. Let's use what we're blessed with and allow ourselves to grow in a much wiser, measured way, but simultaneously recognize what our collective roles are and our individual roles are. There's a little bit of redefinition involved.
So, to start thinking about how we might bring this discussion together, we started with economics. We started with, hey, how do we get to Coca-Cola or that type of product emerging from the space economy as Coca-Cola emerged from the burgeoning U.S. expansionist economy. But at the same time, we're also talking about the role of government needing to shift really to enable that. When you look at what's happening now and where we want to go, what would be a direct, concrete thing that the government should do now and that industry could support? Rather, not just kind of change the charter, change the relationship, but really specifically. For example, should we just tell the FAA and Congress to continue the moratorium on regulation for launches, right? That debate is happening now. Should we do that? Are there other things that we should do to maintain the freedom, but are there possibly also other things we should do to start putting some of these rails on?
I think it's a matter of perception and a matter of knowing that there's a pivot that needs to be addressed. Knowing is half the battle, right? If you think you've figured it all out, you're not going to engage in making any changes. And it doesn't necessarily mean a gut change out of our agencies. Basically, it just means that you got to understand that we need another wing built out that caters to industry and then grow that and allow it to nurture itself. Or even you don't do that, at least at the end of the day, you need to just have the infrastructure created for that growth to occur. Now, if you're going to keep having photo op endeavors where you're going here,
right,
you're going
flag
there,
planting,
yes, flag planting
on whatever.
So what? Are we playing a perception game anymore that the blues are better than the reds, and that's why replanting a flag proves everything we needed to do, and in the process spend billions of dollars? There's more than that, and the key takeaway, Z, is that if we don't do it, others will.
That's right.
With a more directed economy, you can do the type of things while we can debate all day long and all night long and don't allow our brains to pivot and change our perceptions. The others will, because in a directed economy, it's a group of people who say, okay, this is what we're doing and we're gonna do it. So directed economy placed on top of capitalism,
right,
is a process that we've already witnessed that
be
works.
very successful
It's very
in what
successful.
they want to do.
Right.
The means are not ones we agree with, but in terms of achieving their goals, they've been very successful.
But here's the thing. If we get too caught up in the means, we will lose the bigger picture of creating that space economy. So if others are doing it in a way that we don't agree with, so we are keep debating, we will lose the bigger game, which is that we want to be at the helm of the new space economy. So the risk of that is way too high. So we can't spend all our time in this pivot. We need to make this pivot fast so we can focus on the build out rather than the debate.
That's really super important and well said. Focusing on the actions rather than just talking about the policy. Now, you have multiple endeavors and you've invested in space. So kind of, as you think about how you're investing, how you're building out Celestial, for example, ventures, how do you see those particular entities interacting with both the government and the space economy?
Well, the greatest risk we have is Earth dialogue becoming irrelevant. Because we're not the only players. In the past, we were the only players. So we went to the moon and nobody else followed. So we could afford the luxury of time. So now, if we don't do this, and if Celestial is not allowed to grow in a non-directive economy, laissez-faire type of an environment with its set of startups, then we're going to be caught in a world where space economy looks more directed and companies, startups in the rest of the world don't get that opportunity. And if they don't get that opportunity, then we will be caught in a conundrum. Now we have to piggyback and try to grow in a space economy defined by a different approach, by a directed approach. And that's a world I don't know if we're going to want to live with. And it may wind up creating a world of Star Wars. And that's would be a bad place for anyone involved. And not just the government, but the people of Earth. Once you have 2 space stations, God forbid, send a product to each other, that is the beginning of the irrelevancy of planet Earth somewhere down the road. Because then they don't care as much as what we think or about our border concerns and what flag we're waving. Because the minute they start doing commerce among themselves, they have created not just a new economy, but an independent economy. And we've already lived through this on planet Earth. We were colonies, and then we were a separate nation. Once you have a separate nation, you actually have a completely different playing field. And Europe could continue to fight its petty battles among themselves, and we in the United States continue to grow.
Right.
So what makes us think
they were,
that...
They were having the Napoleonic Wars while we were expanding and building economy.
Right, and exactly why would that not occur in space?
So, folks, there you have. This has been a really amazing chat. We've gone from economics to the role of government to the reality of where space could take us in terms of the space economy eventually being an independent economy that exists, that the Earth economy interacts with. But to make that happen, we have to clearly keep it not just open minds, but open regulations, open capabilities, and open economies, and even possibly work with people who it's a little challenging to work with, but the reality is, once we're off the planet, a lot of those interactions and those concerns simply won't be there.
Get it right or become irrelevant in the long run.
Get it right or become irrelevant in the long run. That's where that's how we move on from this to amazing things, off world. For my part, I can't wait to play Quidditch in space and things like that. Because at that point, all you need is a can of whipped cream and a stick, a little bit of propellant. So, when you think, just to wrap up, last question, what do you think is going to, or might be, one of those crazy emergent things that might happen? I know it's kind of, but what is, I don't want to say blue sky.
Yeah.
We're pie in the sky because we're past the sky.
Right.
But what do you hope for that might emerge? That maybe is just something inconceivable while we're on Earth.
So let's take a test case. Mushrooms, right? So you have mushrooms on Earth serving multiple purposes, but one of them is food, right?
Right.
But in space, we can take mushrooms, we can take the seeds. We don't even have to actually
Right, we just take the spores.
We alter it to the point where it can become these larger, much bigger, sturdier mushrooms that we can cut into bricks. Then we take those bricks and we build walls in the Martian lava tubes and cordon off an area where a set number of people can live. They're protected from radiation. We can provide sufficient oxygen. We can retain water in there, and we can build a safe community that's protected from the elements. Now, those same mushrooms would be used for building the walls and building those houses. And then we can also use mushrooms because they don't need that much sunlight in order to be a food source. Now, back on Earth, we struggle with, what would be a better way to build housing for the masses? Well, those same mushrooms would come back here to help us to grow our concrete and allow us to build houses, better housing for the masses. So a world that goes in that direction is the world that benefits in ways we can't encapsulate at the moment. There is a win for planet Earth in order to inject itself into space. And we cannot conceive that. We must take the leap of faith and go into space knowing that we don't know everything.
Well, space mushrooms for houses and salads.
Exactly, both.
Thank you very much, Jayden, for joining us on Space Talks with Z. Thank you to America's Future Series for hosting us. We'll do another talk very soon, and hopefully, maybe eventually do one from space.
Absolutely.
Thanks, folks.